Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kara Joseph, and I am the Training Programs Manager here at Creative Manitoba. We're very excited to be bringing you this program in partnership with Arts Accessibility Network Manitoba. So thank you so much for joining us on this lunch hour. Creative Manitoba and Arts Accessibility Network Manitoba are based on Treaty 1 territory, the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the national homeland of the Red River Métis. As we come together to create and learn, we want to acknowledge and pay respect to the treaties that were made here and honor the original caretakers of this land. So I invite you to join us in considering the histories of colonialism, dispossession, and resistance as we dedicate ourselves to moving forward and creating in the spirit of reconciliation. Without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome Debbie Patterson here today to present. I'll let you take it away, Debbie.
Okay. Hi, thanks so much for that lovely introduction, Kara. I'll just give a visual description in case anyone isn't able to see. So I'm a white woman. I'm in my late 50s. I have short brown hair, and I'm wearing multicolored glasses that are kind of orange and tortoiseshell and blue. I'm sitting in front of a bookcase and some messy looking shelves, and off to my off my right shoulder is a painting by Arlie Ashcroft, local Métis artist. It's actually a print of her painting, of a dancer and two dancers, one of whom is using forearm crutches. And it's painted from a project I did a few years ago. Okay, so hi. I wanted to talk about um, my experience as a disabled theater artist and my perspective on disability in theater and disability aesthetics is in that realm. Um, so I had a conversation with a colleague a couple of months ago, Paul Power, who's on the East Coast, and he is also disabled, and he was talking about how he gets a lot of calls from theaters that want him to work for them as a consultant, and doesn't get very many calls from theaters to work for them as an artist, which is what he is. And I reflected that I share that experience, that I'm often called upon to speak to people about disability or to consult on disability, probably uh, more than 10 to 1, in terms of offers. So and I find that really interesting because people are often looking for a checklist, or how can I make sure I make my theater more accessible for audiences, um, and they're not really considering what they're asking that audience member to come and see. So in theater, there's an absence of disabled people on stage. There's almost never are there disabled people actually on stage, not or out, you know, uh, self-identified disabled people on stage. Um, so so what we're creating in the theater is a world where disability doesn't exist, and we're wondering why more disabled people aren't coming to see it. So so when I'm asked to consult now, my first question is, well, what are you inviting people to come see? You've had wheelchair seating in your theater for decades. When was the last time an actual wheelchair user was on your stage? You've had a hearing system for people who are hard of hearing. When was the last time you cast a deaf person in your show? What are you asking people to come see? If you're asking us to come see a world where we're completely erased, then that's a problem, right? And it's such a lost opportunity because theater, in terms of Crip aesthetics, is so potent because it's about our bodies in time. It's about presence in the present moment, right? And so much of disability is about bodies and time, about the time it takes to do the basic things because we're disabled. Our relationship with time is so different, and it's about our bodies with theater, with live theater, live performance. We're getting bodies in a room together. It's such an intimate thing, and we're not welcoming bodies. Certain bodies are allowed to sit over there, and other bodies are going to be up here. It's such a division. And so it's such a potent place for an exploration of disability aesthetics. And it's just missing missing the opportunity. The other thing about theater that is so potent in terms of disability aesthetics is the world building. Every time you create a play, you build a world, whether that world is, the living room of a family or the world of, I don't know, Scotland in the, I don't know, 1200s or whatever, right? Like what's the world you're building, or outer space? Like you're building a world in your theater, you build a world, and there are rules for that world, and there's a customs in that world, and a moral code for that world. You build a whole world on stage. You could build anything, and what you keep choosing to build is a world without disability. It's very strange. And we can imagine a whole different thing, like a whole other world that makes space for disability. Theater is about telling storytelling at its most basic level. It's a visual art, but it's a narrative art as well. And storytelling is so important. We Stories shape our beliefs, and beliefs guide our actions. There's a reason that most religions have stories as their core, right? Stories teach us how to be in the world. They teach us what the world is. Like we experience the world through stories. We're hungry for it as a species. We consume so many stories. We just go looking for stories all the time. Stories are really powerful. And the act of telling stories is important. There's a really important study called the ACE study. It stands for Adverse Childhood Events, and there's this like it's almost a mathematical formula where you can score uh, a person's um, adverse childhood events. You can add up the score and determine their health outcomes later in life because of adverse events as a child. So anything from the death of a parent, or alcoholism in the home, or moving at a certain age, or losing a best friend, or like any adverse childhood event, you can add up a score and determine health outcomes later. And one thing that can counteract the negative effects of adverse childhood events, and it's documented, is telling the story of your adverse childhood event to your physician. And it doesn't need to be a psychiatrist. You don't need to be treated because of that story. You simply need to speak to your physician, your general practitioner, about your adverse childhood event, and it affects your health outcomes throughout the rest of your life. It's remarkable, the power of narrative. There's also a study that's been done by this amazing palliative care doctor in Winnipeg named Harvey Chochinov, who looks at the importance of narrative at the end of life. So there's this form of therapy where people who are at the end of life share their life story, and someone writes it down for them and then reads it back to them, and creates a narrative of the life. And when that happens, people can die with less anxiety, with less pain. Like, it's documented. Telling your story changes your health outcomes. The power of narrative is intense. And that's what theater is all about. There's so much potential in theater for healing, because storytelling is medicine. I just have to take a little drink. So now I want to talk about another recent event. I was at a conference just a week ago, 1 week ago today. I was at this conference for the Playwrights Guild, and I was moderating a panel. And one of the panelists it was a panel about adaptation, about adapting plays to the stage. And one of the panelists had adapted a book, a memoir called Boy in the Moon, about written by the father of a very disabled son. And so this this playwright had adapted this story to the stage. I think the play is also called The Boy in the Moon. Um, but one of the things he talked about was in the process of adapting the book, he also interviewed the kid's mother, and she confessed that she hoped that her son would die before she did, and he thought this was uh, a kind of a noble sacrifice that this mother wanted to make because she was willing to give up her son before she died. And then he talked about um, writing a play about the murder of Tracy Latimer, who was murdered by her father, who was also disabled, and talked about how, in his worldview, that this was a great act of love on the part of the father, to kill his disabled daughter because he thought it was in her best interest. And so because I was moderating this panel and it was my job to make these playwrights look really good, I couldn't call him out on it. I couldn't, take him up at that moment. So I've written him a letter. So, but I just want to like talk about that. If I just have to unpack that a bit, because I just I just think that a parent wishing the death of their child isn't a sign of nobility or bravery or some kind of courage on the part of the parent. It's a sign of a sick society that makes no place for disabled people and provides no support to the people who love them, provides no place. So that it renders these children useless in our world when they have so much to offer. There is so much that we could all be learning from these kids. And instead, we're applauding their parents for killing them. It is appalling. Um, it's and it's it this playwright also talked about adapting Hannah's Suitcase, which is an amazing novel about the Holocaust. And I don't think he made the connection that the first victims of the Holocaust were disabled children. That before there were death camps, there were hospitals, and parents were coerced into sending their children to hospitals for treatment, and in these hospitals, uh, this is where the Nazis were developing the technology uh, for the gas chambers. This is where it was first used. So to not make that connection that uh, accepting accepting the murder of disabled children as a greater good is the beginning of a slippery slope. It, once we decide, once we presume to decide whose life is worth living and whose is not, I think we open the door to all manner of fascism. It's a dangerous idea. And it also and it becomes a trope, and you see it all the time in film and TV where there's an anti-hero or a character that does something despicable or unlikable, but you know that the writer wants them to be sympathetic, so they give them a disabled family member so that we get the sense that, oh, they're actually a noble sacrificing person because they have a disabled family member, so we'll forgive them for their other shortcomings because clearly they're noble. It's a dangerous trope. And it contributes to the world that we see on stage. The world where not only not only are we erased, but we're actively removed. That the that the disposal of disabled people is celebrated in a way. Um, it doesn't have to be that way. There's so many, we're building worlds here. We can build any world we want, right? So to contrast that, uh, I worked with a playwright in from Shakespeare in the Rough, who is creating a new adaptation of Richard III, and it was called Richard III, I think. And in it, she created this world. So she used the text from Richard III, and Richard III is it's one of Shakespeare's plays, and Richard is disabled, and he's the only sort of obviously disabled character, central character in all of Shakespeare's plays. the actual body of Richard III was dug up a couple of years ago from under a parking lot, and he did in fact have a curved spine, a scoliosis. In the play, they talk about how he is a hunchback and he limps. He walks with a limp. So yes, that actual king actually was disabled. Excuse me. And often when the play is produced, it's the disability is used as a metaphor for his evilness, because he's a bad guy in the play. He's not supposed to be king. His brother's king. His other brother should be king. He gets rid of his brothers. He gets rid of his nephews who should have been king before him, and he becomes king. And then just keeps killing in order to maintain his power. So usually, often, when people produce this play, they use the metaphor of, broken, twisted body and broken, twisted soul. I was in a production of it. Actually, there's a poster from a production of it right there. That's not mine. That's another production that I was in. I was in a production of it, and we chose to take the approach of it being a disability revenge play, so that throughout Richard's life, he's been overlooked and abused and taken advantage of by his brothers, who both want power, and he's been denied power. He's been denied status in society. He's been denied friendship, romance, all of it because of his disability. And an event happens where they win a war, and his brother, once again, it's his brother who becomes king, and he isn't going to take it anymore. And so he plots to get his revenge by becoming king, by showing them that he can he 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 can be powerful, that he can hold power. Nobody believes he can. And so in our production, we used that the way that disabled people are underestimated so often as a way for him to kind of sneak in through the cracks, because nobody thinks he's capable of anything because he limps. So he's able to maneuver his way up to the top without being detected. So this other production that I supported with Shakespeare in the Rough was sort of Shakespeare fan fiction. So it used some of Richard III, but there was another Richard that was from an alternate universe. So the Richard from the alternate universe came from a world where disability was honored, where it was recognized as a gift, where people with disabilities were not only welcome but were elevated in society, were seen as leaders. And so through some magical means, this Richard from this other society is magically brought into the world of Richard III that we're more familiar with, where Richard is killing to get what he wants. And the Richard from the other world doesn't understand why you would kill to get what you want. Isn't it better to work together with other people and cooperate? Because that's the world where that is disability led, recognizes the value of interdependence rather than as superior to independence. That that we achieve more when we work together. So that's what the world could be. So my question for you to think about for the next 15 minutes or so is, what world would you build if you could build a world on stage? What are some of the qualities in the world that you would build? What kind of what kind of moral code? What kind of social structure? What kind of laws would you build in your world? What kind of aesthetic? What color would it be? What texture? What shapes? What world would you build if you could? So much of so much of the process of being disabled is useful in making art. I find because I have a progressive disability. So my abilities change from day to day, and it's kind of episodic. It comes and goes, but it gradually moves on, gradually progresses. So I'm frequently arriving at something that I used to be able to do, and I can no longer do it in the way that I used to do it. And so when that happens, I have to figure out another way of doing something. And what what that means is every other way of doing something suddenly becomes possible. When I had one way of doing something that worked, I would only ever do things that way. But once that way is gone, limitless possibilities open up, right? Once you can't just walk across the room and you have to get across the room, how are you going to do it? You could crawl, you could roll, you could somersault, you could shoosh on your bum, you could you could uh, use a wheelchair. Like there's so many possibilities. You could get someone to carry you. Like there's so many ways to get from one side of the room to the other. When you can walk, that's all you're going to do. And so as a tool for art making, disability is really, really useful because it opens up limitless possibilities. When you're making a play, when you're blocking the play, you suddenly have limitless possibilities of how you're going to move bodies around in space because not everybody has to walk around. You can do anything. You can do anything. So Crip process is kind of, for me, the process of trying and failing and trying again and adapting, constantly adapting to a new way of being. And it is a creative and generative process that changes the way I've made art and changes the way I live my life and and makes and has been a source of possibility rather than restriction. Crip aesthetic is also a process of recognizing barriers as opportunities rather than seeing a barrier as something that stops you. A barrier is something that gives you an opportunity to think creatively, to try something new, to take a risk. All things that we celebrate in art making, that we look for. We look for places to take risks. We look for opportunities to try something new. Every barrier is giving you these opportunities. We live in this world where well, and who knows, later today it might get harder, where things are hard, where the climate change is real and it's affecting all of us. The pandemic is still around, like we're still changing the way we do things post-pandemic. We wouldn't have done this, for example. We wouldn't have had a Zoom gathering pre-pandemic, which is, right? This is case in point. Here's an opportunity that we would not have had without the barrier of the pandemic to teach us how to do this, right? So the world is changing and we need to change with it. We need to adapt. And how are we going to address the barriers that we come up against? What are the stories we're telling that are going to help us live well in the world into the future? So now more than ever, the exclusion of disabled theater artists from the mainstream theater milieu, from our storytelling, is extremely problematic. It is so necessary that disabled voices be heard in the theater, that our stories be told, and that our way of telling stories be experienced. Because we're all going to have to learn this process of failing, trying and failing and trying again. This process of adapting, this process of approaching a barrier and finding the opportunity within the barrier to discover something new. we are going to need more than ever, we're going to need the the anti-capitalist, the interdependent rather than independent way of living in order to address climate change, in order to address many of the changes that are upon us now. And if we keep telling stories where disabled people don't exist, where failure is, where weakness is a problem and strength is good, where failure is bad and success is the only, we forget that we learn more from failure than we learn from success. So when we fail, shouldn't we embrace that as a great opportunity to grow, develop, and change? We need to build a world where we value weakness as much as strength, because weakness is how we build strong webs of interdependence. We all love offering help, but we all hate having to ask for help because we feel kind of like diminished, right? But when someone asks you for help and you can help, it makes you feel so good. Right? And so if no one is asking for help, then no one is making everybody feel good, right? Like we need people asking for help in order to be able to provide help, in order to build that web of interdependence. If no one is asking for help, then no one is extending it, and that those connections never get made. So we're all individuals in our little boxes, kind of like now, but not. But we're all like fighting our own private battle and never sharing it, seeing everybody else as the enemy rather than seeing everybody else as allies. And that world that we build that excludes disability reinforces that idea. We need to challenge the forces of capitalism in our world that have create division, that create climate crisis, that value, that need people to be weak and poor in order for other people to be strong and rich, to provide the negative example of you must keep working or you'll end up like them, right? We need the stories that lift us all up together. Slavoj Žižek, that's his name. I was blanking on his name. Slavoj Žižek, who's like this super smarty pants, said that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. Like how many blockbuster movies have you seen about the end of capitalism compared to blockbuster movies about the end of the world, right? And I think if we don't learn to imagine the end of capitalism, we will indeed encounter the end of the world. So are we going to save ourselves? Are we going to use imagination to save ourselves? Or will we keep imagining a world where disability doesn't exist, where each person is strong on their own, where we all survive on our own merits rather than through the collective, and the community that lifts us all up together? And so now I'll ask you one more time. If you could build the world, what world would you build? And I'm actually asking, I'm inviting you to respond. Yeah, I'm inviting you to respond. What world would you build if you could? I'll talk a little bit more about storytelling and disability and what happens. So because disabled people have been kept out of our storytelling media for so long, the most of the stories we have that reflect disability are told by people without disabilities for people without disabilities. And usually those fall into two categories. There's the cautionary tale, which is don't drink and drive or you'll end up in a wheelchair and the rest of your life will be horrible. Or the super Crip, the inspiration porn. So the other story is, despite disabilities, this person manages to achieve, all these things. And usually all these things are like, this person still has a job, even though they're in a wheelchair, which is kind of silly because lots of people with wheelchairs have jobs. But I mean, I've been congratulated for showing up at the grocery store in a wheelchair. I've been congratulated for taking a plane by myself. So these these stories about disability don't reflect the lived experience of disability, and they're limiting, and they're limiting not just to disabled people, but to all of us, and they diminish all of us. Tom says the idea that some people need to have less so others can have more have come up in several conversations that you've been in recently. That's really cool. Yeah, and it's also a tool of capitalism to make people work harder for less money. Um, when it's harder to get a job or hold a job, it's then you can, then the employers can extract more labor out of people. An accessible future that is inclusive without any barriers, including economic access for disabled artists to be supported in ways that allows the create and present their work, allows them to create. Yes. Yeah. Chanaka, that's such an important one. Um, we know that again during COVID, when a lot of people were enjoying CERB, we know people who are on disability assistance were not receiving as much money as people on CERB. Like as a society, we decided how much money a person needs to survive, and it was more than people with disabilities have been getting, and it's more than they continue to get. And even during COVID, when everyone else was getting $2,000 a month from the government, disabled people were still getting less than that. And they continue to. Um, and there's still the issue of marriage inequality for disabled people, because if you're on assistance and you cohabit with another person, then you lose access to your financial stability. You lose access to your assistance, because you become a household, and so then your household income is taken into account rather than your personal income. So that people with disabilities end up being financially and sometimes physically dependent on their live-in partners, or you have to choose to not enter into a relationship in order to maintain some kind of financial stability for yourself. And as much as I love interdependence and the idea that we can cooperate and live together, and why should one person need financial independence? It's a very different thing to be completely financially dependent on one person who lives with you, and is actually a dangerous position to put yourself in. Kara says a world where accommodations are not something that need to be requested, but are ingrained in the way we live, work, and create from the beginning. That's gorgeous. Yeah. There's there's a movement afoot. Well, I've done a couple of productions now. So one of the thing that Sick and Twisted Theater does is we have a audio description service. So we provide live audio describers for other theaters who are doing shows so that their place can be accessible to blind people or people with low vision. So that during the performance, there's a describer hiding off in a corner with a stenographer microphone that covers her face so that the people sitting near them can't hear them. And then a bunch of people in the audience who are blind or low vision have little receivers in one ear. So they're watching the play, but they're hearing the describer whisper in their ear about, like if you're at the Agatha Christie, you have to know if someone switched the coffee cups, right? You have to know if someone is snuck in the door behind them. You need to know these things as an audience member, and you can't see them, so they're getting the information in their ear. But another thing that's more common, or that's that's becoming, I guess, in our world is shows with integrated description. So I just worked on a show that just closed a couple of days ago in Toronto called Flin Flon Cowboy, that was created by a disabled artist, and as part of it, we did integrated audio description. So there was a narrator character on stage, and the narrator described everything that happened. A lot of the play was storytelling. A lot of it was a memoir play. So the central character, it was his life story. And so a lot of it was him telling stories of things that happened in his life. So, a lot of it was described already, but all the other action that happened on stage, we integrated that description into the play so that everybody could hear the description, and blind people didn't experience a different show from everybody else. And we had captions on stage. So there were captions projected on stage of everything that everyone said, including the description, so that people who can't hear would be able to see the captions and read what was in it. So that the access for that show was integrated right into the performance. At Sick and Twisted, we're working on a show that we're doing in the spring called Neither Here Nor There, which is a collaboration between blind and trans or non-binary artists. And for that production, we're having integrated description, but we're also we're using a traverse stage, so the audience is on either side and the play happens in the middle. And right down the middle, between the two sides of audience, is a curtain, and half the play happens on one side and half on the other. It's a sort of a see-through curtain. It's a scrim, like a sheer curtain, so that you can see the whole play, but some of it will be seen through the scrim, so it'll be uh, less in focus, I guess, for you, so that we're trying to deprioritize vision or the visible in this production because it's made by blind artists. So we want to just change up the primacy of vision in the way we make our show. Oh no, David Bowie had tickets to the Flin Flon Cowboy final performance and it was canceled. I was so disappointed too, David. It was terrible. Yeah, Ken is feeling better. It was terrible that we had to cancel that show. Yeah, and it was a sold out performance as well. It was heartbreaking. I guess it just means that we'll have to remount the show and tour it at a later date. Yeah, I'm sorry you didn't get to see it, David. Okay, Sarah, you posted a world where we are not a problem to be managed, but people whose own stated preferences are honored. Thank you so much for that. So often, yeah, and it's true. In narratives on stage about disability, so often the disability is presented as the problem, right? That if there's a story that centers disability, then the problem is there's a disability and we need to solve this problem. And the only way to solve that problem is through a miracle cure, or so the removal of the disability, or death, the death of the disabled person. And most of us with disabilities don't have either of those options as an ending that we look forward to. The one is unrealistic and one is not desirable. So what does it mean to solve a problem, right? And how do we make the problem not the disability? How do we start? Yeah, well, I mean, I guess by starting to tell stories where disability is just part of your given circumstances and not the problem that needs to be solved, then we will stop being treated like problems that need to be solved. Yeah. Yeah. And it's so North American too, to treat, I guess, white North American, to treat disability as a problem that needs to be solved. I know I certainly feel like when I'm told in subtle but not so subtle ways that I'm in the way when I'm out in the world, it's invariably a white person telling me that. When I'm offered help in a way that is helpful, it's usually not a white person that's offering me help. So let's just make sure that we frame that as a race-based attitude, um, because it's actually true. Through my lived experience, I've come to notice that trend, that I'm treated like a problem by some people and not by others. But yeah, we don't need to be managed. We need to be supported. Yeah, yeah. And so often it does feel like we're being managed. Even by these theaters that say they want to be more accessible. So often when you try to book, yeah, as an audience member, when I try to book the accessible seats online, I'm not able to book them online. I have to phone in. Like I can't just, at 2 in the morning go, hey, yeah, I need to buy those tickets. I keep forgetting to get those tickets, but buy those tickets. I can't do that like a normal person. I have to phone someone, wait on hold for 20 minutes and book the seats in the wheelchair section. Why? Because they need to manage me. They need to, you know, I don't need to be managed. Get the chairs out. They put chairs there so that people can sit there if they don't bring their own chair. But that's the wheelchair seating. Get the chairs out of there. And if someone doesn't bring their own chair, then you can move a chair in. Don't move the chair out for me because it shouldn't be there in the first place. David, I love the ideas you are presenting. We really have to be even more creative in how we manage our theater worlds, but it is that creativity that comes from lived experience that sets new standards in the theater experience. Thank you. Yes, exactly, exactly. And that, yeah, yeah, I feel like that that not only is the lived experience of disability, it forces you to be imaginative. It forces you to imagine a new way of doing things. And so as an artist, what's wrong with that? You know, what a gift, right? What a gift to be disabled and an artist, to have the opportunity to imagine your way around barriers. And with the world that we live in, we need Imagineers to to find it, to figure out a new world that we can, a new way of working together, a new way of living together, a new way of sharing this space, a new way of sharing resources that honors all of us and doesn't destroy the planet in the process and makes sure all our needs get met. Yeah. And that imaginative, creative way of being needs to be supported in our world. Needs to be, and yeah, and disability helps us get there. Ableism Ableism hurts us all because ableism says that your value as a person is based on your ability to work, your ability to produce, your ability to move swiftly and efficiently through the world, you know? And so all of us are diminished by that belief system. Anyone who, any little thing that happens, you feel ashamed, right? You get sick, you have to miss a day of work, you feel ashamed for having gotten sick. Like there's something wrong with you, like you've somehow sinned, that you've transgressed by getting sick. You have so many of us are embarrassed by our body problems. We don't say what we need because because we're told that we shouldn't have needs. We should just be strong and independent and not have weaknesses, not have bodies that require things of us. Um, and all of us have needs. All of us have little quirks in our, little things that we should be addressing, that we should be supporting. So that belief, that ableist belief hurts us all. It's, there's like there's nothing to lose by abandoning ableism in this world. You know, nobody loses anything. We all gain. We all have bodies. We all have bodies that will fail sometimes. We'll all be temporarily disabled at some point in our lives. You'll break a leg, you'll break a wrist, you'll, I don't know, stub your toe. Like you're going to be temporarily disabled and perhaps permanently disabled at some point in your life. You're probably only temporarily able-bodied anyway. So why not? Why not divorce yourself from these ableist ways of thinking and embrace, this the truth of your lived experience as a human being? the truth of your humanity, that you need things, that you have weaknesses, that you need to eat, you need to sleep, you need to go to the bathroom. Like all these things are normal. We show up at work after a night of insomnia feeling guilty that we can't focus. What are you supposed like? You're a human. You have insomnia. You can't work like that. It's okay to have weaknesses. It's okay to say my body needs something right now. Why are we buying into this ableist agenda that just further entrenches us in a capitalist society where all we are here to do is work and build capital for someone else, you know? Yeah. So I guess I'm saying that's the world I would build. That the anti-capitalist world is the world I want to build on stage. That's the world we want to imagine, the end of capitalism. And it's our job as artists, right? To imagine a world. So if we can imagine the end of the world, let's imagine the end of capitalism, which will help us deal with economic crisis, deal with the climate crisis. Like it all gets better. It all gets better when we stop being ableist. So yeah, we have 10 minutes left. If anyone has some final thoughts or final questions or things to share.
Thank you, first of all, so much, Debbie. That was really honest and impactful. I do remember having a conversation with you a couple of years ago for a podcast that we did,
Oh yeah.
and we had talked about separating ourselves from the idea that our value is based in what we produce or what we can do, and it's not, and kind of having to understand that that is not the way we need to exist in this world. And I think that can be really hard for everyone
Yeah.
to come to terms with, that your value is not based in what you produce or what you're, those kinds of ideas, but it's just who you are. You are valued as you are. And I think that that idea could really carry us far in creation and in life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and you're right, and I do struggle with it still, that like as an artist, I want to produce great work, right? I want to do
Mm-hmm.
like cool things. So I do, yeah, I do struggle with that identity question, right? Of like, who am I if I'm not producing?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really good question to ask and to keep asking and to check in with all the time. Um, but you said something about, yeah, presence, like simply being present is so valuable. And I think we underestimate the value of that. And
Mm-hmm.
you can see it on stage. When a person walks on stage, they don't have to do anything. If they are simply present, if they're, in their body, in the space, in the room, and aware, right? It is so riveting to watch. Just
Mm-hmm.
presence. And we don't teach it, we don't acknowledge it, we don't recognize it. We see it and we're attracted to it, but we don't know what it is we're looking at, right? And it's just present. And so if that is like if that has power, then why distract yourself with the busy of other bullshit when presence is what we're looking for? That's actually what we're looking for in each other, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's if it's enough on stage, it's enough everywhere else.
Yeah. 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 Any other thoughts, questions, queries? David, I just wanted to say that it is great to learn more about the work that is happening in Winnipeg. I live in Ontario and know little about what you are doing there, so thanks so much for this time together. Thanks so much, David. I'd like to know more about your work too. Well, I'll just take a couple of minutes to promote our next show. So,
Absolutely.
Sick and Twisted Theater is working on a panto right now that we're doing for the holiday season. It will open on December 12th. at Prairie Theatre Exchange in the smaller theater, and it's called Hansel and Gretel in Portage Place Mall. So it's the story of Hansel and Gretel who get lost and try to find their way home and end up in the back of a candy shop in Portage Place Mall. Dangerous things occur. There's a property developer who's evil. There's a dad who really wants to get them back. There's the brothers Grimm show up. Yeah. Oh, great. Thanks, David. David says, thanks. I'm an artist, but I also operate Vibrafusion Lab. Cool. Great to know. Cool.
For one, I'm very excited to see this panto.
Yeah, it's performed by an all-disabled cast. Oh, Chenika, if accessibility riders were more common, perhaps there would be more acceptance that we all need accommodations no matter how you identify. Yeah, that's excellent. Yes, accessibility riders. Do we all know what that is? An accessibility rider is like when you're offered a contract, I often send back an accessibility rider that itemizes all the things I need in order to do my job. So, if I'm working out of town, then I'll let them know what I need in terms of accommodation and transportation once I get there. And it can also be in the room, so I also, if I'm working as a performer at a theater, I need to, communicate with the designer well in advance, the set designer as well as costume designer, because certain costume elements work on my body and others don't work at all, because of the wheelchair. I use a wheelchair. And again, certain set elements will work for me and some will not. So I like to request time with the designers in advance so that we can make sure that everything's going to work for everybody. But everybody has, and I request bathroom breaks, more bathroom breaks. But everybody has things they need in order to do their best work, and whatever that is, you can put that in a document. And when you're offered a contract, send it to the person offering you the contract and say, yes, this is this is what I need in order to do this job. Thank you for these, the terms of what you're offering. This is what I'm requesting, and and then negotiate from there. Some people also talk about inclusion riders where, if I'm being hired, I'm a disabled person being hired to be in a show. It's hard to be the only disabled person in the room. It's better if there's another one, if there's another person, especially if the other person is on the other side of the table. So if I'm an actor in a show, it's better for me if there's another disabled person who's stage managing or assistant directing or directing, so that there's an awareness of what my needs might be by the creative team, so that they're, I don't have to constantly be advocating for myself. There's someone else who can do that advocacy. So inclusion writers, and also, just to like give your peeps a hand up, right? Like, if you want me in the show, please think about having another disabled person on the show. Yeah.
Any other questions, comments?
Have to jump to another meeting, but thank you for sharing your expertise and ideas. Very appreciated. Thank you so much for coming.
Yes,
thank you. And thank you all for sharing so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Debbie. This was a really informative and wonderful conversation. And I just also appreciated just the honesty behind it, and that everyone who was sharing was also very vulnerable and honest as well. It was a great conversation, and I really appreciate spending this hour together.
Thank you. And thanks for the invitation. I really enjoyed thinking about it and prepping for it. And and sharing these ideas.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thanks,
it's a very
Sarah.
important thing to talk about.
Thanks.
I once again like to thank AANM for their support in our creative accessibility across Canada workshops. We have one more coming up for you on November 28th, so stay tuned for those details. You can check out our website. Other than that, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day and week. Thank you again, Debbie.
Thanks, Kara.
Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.